In the 40s and 50s, the BBC were reluctant to risk showing pictures to accompany hard news items. For many years, bulletins were read from behind an unchanging caption card. And when pictures were introduced, they were hardly of the stuff on which governments may rise or fall and wars be won or lost.
One of the unexpected things about Widdicombe Fair is that until baritones all over the world began singing about Uncle Tom Cobley and all, very few people knew of it. Not far away from Widdicombe is the little Devon town of Honiton, where, as long ago as the reign of Queen Elizabeth, the art of lace-making was introduced from Brussels.
And there it was, the day's events in a nutshell. Honiton lace was very much the fabric of television newsreel. But with the coming of ITN in 1955 came not so much a changing face of news as merely a face. Former 4-minute miler Chris Chataway. It was mere minutes after the studio floorboards were in place that he became Britain's first newscaster.
Good evening. The government is not going to grant automatic...
We really were very keen to present news in a totally different way. We wanted to be tougher, shorter, more aggressive, more incisive, much more interesting. Our hero was Ed Murrow, and I suppose that it was Ed Murrow that we regarded as the doyen of the profession. He was a newscaster as well as a reporter.
But with the introduction of personalities at ITN, there's been a danger that news may be tainted with individual opinion. A change of emphasis or mere facial gestures are all that may be required. But Sir Alistair Burnett believes that this has not occurred in Britain.
The star of the news is the news, and anybody who gets his or her personality between the news and the public, which is switched on to get the news, is not a good newscaster. Let me say that every newscaster that has left ITN has never made any dent in the ratings. And when I leave ITN, I'll not make any dent in the ratings either.
The raw talent of Chris Chataway and Robin Day in the 50s is a far cry from the well-simmered professionalism of Sir Alistair Burnett. This reflects a growing awareness of the power of television news. The training offered to Chris Chataway seems more appropriate to the Mona Lisa than to a newscaster.
We didn't have any cameras, so at the end of the day when we had been preparing our news bulletins, we would sit down and somebody would hold up a large picture frame, and the editor and other senior members of the establishment would get themselves the other side of the picture frame, and we would deliver our news bulletin into it. So it wasn't a very extensive training.
In today's electronic age, improved news-gathering techniques and ever more violent television images, coupled with increasing levels of disorder, have led to many examinations of the power of television news. But a leading academic on violence, Richard Clutterbuck, believes that the responsibilities of TV journalists are still not fully realised.
My view is that the journalists just don't realise their own power these days. The picture of a journalist is a seedy character who comes along and puts his foot in the door, fingering a £5 note, turning up on a pushbike and saying, "Come on, lady, let's have your story." Well, I mean, this is as dead as a doornail. That's Edwardian stuff. I mean, a journalist now, with the electronic media, has power to influence the community's view out of all proportion. And I think, in exchange for that power, he ought to show a great deal more responsibility than most journalists do show. But then, of course, they're under pressure, terrific pressure in competition with each other, to be quite ruthless and, in some occasions, to be quite unscrupulous in exploiting things, no matter what the cost, in order to grab the news, which is, I think, a great crime.
And Sir Robin Day believes that the quality of news coverage is surrendered to the appeal of strong visual images.
People use the medium irresponsibility because it is very tempting. People say, we've got some bloody good pictures today. We've got some starving, pot-bellied children. We've got some people lying all over the tarmac who are all mutilated. And that is a much better picture than an explanation of an issue which has no visual content.
And if there's a growing quest for visual stimulation at the expense of genuine education, has television news become another form of entertainment?
The rioters came from behind the security of their burning barricades to lob petrol bombs, bricks and bottles at the police lines. And suddenly Brixton, a South London area of high unemployment, was under siege. The streets littered with broken glass and rubble and burning cars. For the first hour or so, officers with blood on their faces and shirts waited anxiously for reinforcements. One constable turned out to be an inspector in a borrowed helmet.
Police! Company police! Company police! Company police!
It surrounded that section and moved them up the road. And it was then that the now familiar running fights broke out.
By 7 a.m., 4,000 miners were at Orgreave waiting for the coke lorries to arrive. Police had been expecting them. They equaled the number of pickets. After 2 hours, the police were tired of being pushed and pelted with house bricks. The pickets knew what to expect. They'd been warned it could turn nasty, and it did.
Down the street, the General Council of the TUC.
The news should not be just bang, 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 and funerals and violence and headlines and so on. That is too tabloid a concept of news. That's to say, a good newspaper contains serious news, features, sport, articles about people, explanations about things, and they are spread about the pages in a way which television news does not.
As we, the press and the Americans evacuating, made our drive through Saigon to the American embassy, people, mostly families, pleaded with us for a seat, and they hung to the coach. The coach behind us suddenly accelerated, and children hanging on the side fell off and under the wheels.
All I know is that these bastards rushed in and this guy hit me up back at head with a bloody shield and knocked me to the ground. Ouch.
In the miners' strike, where there was violence, and where there was a violence which we haven't seen in this country since the early years of this century, yes, of course, we had to be careful what images we put out on the air. But we did put out not only violence by policemen, which Mr. Arthur Scargill didn't often recognize that we did put out, but we put out, naturally, violence by miners and by people who were not miners, but who were apparently supporting the miners' cause. So you have to hold a balance.
The controversy over bias of viewpoints is unlikely to end, as Alistair Burnett suggests. But holding a balance of viewpoint is not to say that reporting itself is balanced. Television news, by its very nature, seems to tilt the emphasis away from peaceful protests and towards action and violence, as former Exeter University lecturer Richard Clutterbuck explains.
I can quote you a case of this. There was a 10-hour demonstration once outside Transport House, and in the course of that there was 2 minutes of violence. Well, you guess which were the 2 minutes that got on the news. There's not much doubt about that. The violence was the only thing that the media wanted to report, because the media want to get exciting pictures. If one channel shows a lot of exciting pictures and the other one shows a lot of dull ones, people are going to watch the exciting one, and therefore what they tend to report is the violence, because there's nothing other than sex which will beat violence in attracting an audience.
Attempts to explain, rather than merely expose, have in the past been provided by informed current affairs programmes. Tonight, This Week, Panorama. But while audiences for the more kaleidoscopic News at 10 rise, viewing figures for current affairs are falling, a fact explained in a forthright manner by Sir Robin Day.
There aren't any good current affairs programmes, or not so many good current affairs programmes as there used to be. I think if you had a good, vivid current affairs programme, by current affairs we mean tending to explain the background and issues rather than just plain news, we'd have good audiences for them.
Publicity seekers are now well aware of what makes news bulletins. So today, television camera crews must be wary of their mere presence distorting the news. Richard Clutterbuck.
If the cameras actually appear, certain people tend to act up. Now, one of the best reporters I know, Kate Adie of the BBC, she tells me that she never, if she can possibly avoid it, takes any visible camera with her at all. And she says in those circumstances, once they see a camera, I'm no longer photographing the truth. I'm photographing a performance laid on for my benefit.
Nowhere was this more apparent, or were there more tragic consequences, than when an ITN news crew stumbled across a man arrested by the Nigerian military, suspected of being a Biafran soldier.
What are you doing here? What are you doing here? Do you live here?
No, sir. I'm from house to take port. From there, I begin to look my parents.
Are you an Igbo?
Yes, sir.
But you're not a Biafran soldier?
Yeah.
Were the events that followed a shocking show of reality captured by chance, or a deliberately staged publicity performance?
Yes, I'm not a Biafran soldier. Is that so? I'm a civilian and I'm looking for my parents. Yes, sir. Huh? They've been my...
So, has the power of television risen beyond the role of mere communicator? Is it a news breaker or a news maker?
If there is no action and no excitement, the picture's just going to get on. This is an encouragement to light the thing up a bit.